It is Sunday, 24 July 2022. In today's Skidmark, I want to talk a bit about something that has been bothering me for a long time. And the more the chaos expands and develops in Europe, the more I think about it. And I'm thinking about Libya. That was, for me, uncalled for and a major tragedy. And exactly what happens when the West tries to export their idea of democracy. When the West imposes their will onto countries in Africa and in the Middle East and in the Far East, all over the world actually. That's how they operate. And I'm going to put a link in the description of this video to the article that I read, and you can go and read the whole article yourself. I'm going just to give snippets out of it. By the way, if you hear background noises, rumbling, there is an unseasonal thunderstorm building up, and the black-headed oriole is going crazy. So that is the background noises that you may hear. But let's talk about Libya. And it says, Libya, how did we get here? At the national level, Gaddafi was able to deal with two central dilemmas characteristics of Libyan society. On the one hand, the difficulty of exercising control over the tribes, and on the other, the fragmentation of society into diverse and sometimes opposite tribal and regional groups. Now that is a standard characteristic of countries in Africa. They are usually made up of a number of tribes, and in some countries there's a hell of a lot of tribes. Here in South Africa we've got a situation that we are sitting with 11 official languages. So it's not as simple as in Europe, where in Europe, when the boundaries were drawn after World War II, those boundaries basically included people of the same cultural heritage and so forth. Hungarians together, Polish together, in the Netherlands the Dutch together, the Germans together, the French together, the Italians together. But in Africa it's a different story. These countries are made up of large tribes, large numbers of tribes, and many of the borders were drawn by Europeans, bringing a surveyor in and pegging a line and say that's the border, never taking in consideration how tribes and tribal lands were affected by these borders that were imposed on countries in Africa. But that is, once again, the arrogance of the West. They do what they like. And the second-rate citizens, the peasants, must just fall into line. Gaddafi had the ability to hold together these territories with little connection to each other. It is estimated that there are about 140 tribes in the Libyan territory, each with different traditions and origins. At the international level, Pan-Arabism should be highlighted with a confrontation opened in the United States due to the opposition that Gaddafi exerted on the influence of this country, reaching closer ties with other Arab countries to carry out common policies of rejection of Washington's policies on the Middle East and Africa. The Libyan leader worked to strengthen ties with neighboring countries such as Egypt, Morocco, Syria, Tunisia, Chad, among others, as well as maintaining close relations with countries like France and Russia. Gaddafi also connected with Latin American countries such as Venezuela and Cuba, which led him to cultivate an extensive network of contacts and uncomfortable influence for Europe and the US. By the time of his killing, Libya had the highest GDP per capita and life expectancy on the continent. Fewer people lived below poverty line than in the Netherlands. It is important to take note of that, because the current generation of people don't really know what happened in Libya and what Gaddafi actually did in Libya. Yes, he was an autocrat. Yes, he was ruling that country with an iron fist. But he used the resources of that country to build out that society. Libyan economy was booming. Libyan social life was going very well. They had free education, free medical. When a couple gets married, the Libyan government gave them a house. Things like that. Things that the West does not do. America doesn't do things like that for its citizens. Europe doesn't do that for its citizens. But the West, and especially the Americans, hated Gaddafi because he did not take instructions from them. And he signed his death warrant when he decided that he wants gold for his oil and he wants to establish a United States of Africa with a currency that was gold-based. And that was the end of it. We all know of the nightmare in Benghazi and that Clinton witch, how she was involved there. Americans were killed. But never forget, who stoked the fires there? Who stoked the fires in Libya? It was the Americans. The fall of Gaddafi. The citizens' protest that began in Tunisia in December 2010, the Arab Spring, arrived a month later in neighboring Libya, although in a different way, as the mass and popular demonstrations that characterized Tunisia and Egypt were not replicated. In contrast, in Benghazi, where the anti-Gaddafi movement focused, Islamist groups predominated. Some political analysts agree that in Libya there was never a mass movement on a national scale like the other countries, nor was there popular support to overthrow Gaddafi's government. Now I'll stop this and you can read it if you want. But take note, it wasn't out of control in Libya, but then the Americans started it and instigated and stoked the fires. And the rest is history. I'm going to show you a few images. Look at this image. That was Libya under Gaddafi, a thriving city. This is a shot of Tripoli. Here is an indication of the type of buildings that was there and the resorts. Beautiful. And then NATO and the US decided to bring democracy to Libya. And this is the results. Chaos, death and destruction. If you look at these images, it makes your hair stand up straight. And for me, I don't know, I'm an African. For me, this makes me angry. This makes me really angry. Look at this. This is what the West brings when they bring democracy. And here, this is the end result. This is what is left of Libya. I didn't want to put up more images because basically the whole Libya looks like this. Everywhere, death and destruction. 5 years later and the Americans are still bombing Libya. I cannot understand it. And I'm doing this little skidmark specifically to maybe in a way affirm the reasons why I am rooting for Russia. Because what the Americans and NATO did in Libya, they had exactly the same plans for Russia. And Putin said, come, think again. The problem that the West and NATO and US has with Russia is Russia can defend itself. Russia is not defenseless. If they try the stunts that they did in Libya, they will pay dearly. So on this Sunday, I want you to think about these things. These atrocities that is committed by the West in the name of democracy, it must be called out for what it is. This is crimes against humanity, and there is war crimes here. and the West must pay for it. They must be held accountable. But nowhere in the world. Look at how much focus is placed on so-called war crimes committed by Russians in Ukraine. But there's never a word breathed about the people killed in Libya, killed in Yemen, killed in Iraq, killed in Syria. The West can go around the globe and bomb everybody to pieces and kill millions of people and play a role in millions of children starving. But not a word is ever printed about that. And I am, in a way, I'm sad that I'm an old guy. I'm never going to see the full results of all these things. But I am very glad that Russia and the rest of the world is obviously saying this must stop. And you can be as emotional as you like. You can be as arrogant as you like. But you must just take in consideration, if the West should get into a direct confrontation with Russia, the West will lose. And the West must not be surprised if countries like China, India, joins the party and wipe the West out. The West has been enforcing its will on the rest of the world for a very long time. And the Ukraine adventure has highlighted that. Between Russia and its BRICS partners, they are going to destroy that stranglehold that the West has on the rest of the world. Think about these things. And by the way, hit the like, hit the subscribe, share. It costs you nothing. Thank you.